In this lesson we're going to set up an environment for our scene. So let's have a look at our render so far. So you can see it's kind of working, we've got glass there, but we haven't actually got anything in the background to see, so it's difficult to see the glass, and it's got nothing around it to reflect apart from these objects. So an environment will help this a lot. So what we're going to do, first of all, we'll just lift these glasses up a little bit because it looks like they're intersecting the ground, and it doesn't look like you can see the bottom of the glass. So let's just try moving this up a little bit. So I'm just going to hide this, and we'll go to the hierarchy selection, this button here, so that we can select the group rather than just the object. This is a group here, and we'll just move it up, and now you can see that we get some extra detail there because it's actually above the ground. Let's see if we can do a bit more. There we go. That's better. Now they don't look like they're floating. Just check that that's all the way out. Yep, it is. Alright, so now let's set up the background. So what we'll do is we'll set up an image plane for this in the regular Maya way. So I'm just going to make sure I'm in my camera here and click on this button here, and we'll just pick background low, and we'll say open. And I'm just going to fit this. If I come down, I'm going to fit this in the vertical direction. So if you just watch the image here, we go vertical and then fit to resolution gate. It should fit to the height rather than the width, and that's better. Okay, so now you can see we've got our, let's just update this. We've got our texture there in the background. At the moment, you can see that it's not actually showing through our glass. And the reason for that is that by default, the image plane does not appear in reflections or refractions. So that's pretty simple to fix. You just go down to render stats, it's still inside the image plane here, render stats, and we're just going to go to visible and reflections, visible and refractions, and just update the scene. There we go. That's much better. If you want to get this back, this image plane back, just make sure that you click on this button here, the properties for the camera, and you can see the image plane is attached, so it's easy to get to there. So in this image here, you can see that it looks a little bit washed out, and that's because of the color management. So when I chose that as a texture, Arnold automatically created a TX file. We'll talk more about TX files a bit later, but basically that's Arnold's format for textures. It's an optimized format for textures. So if I just pick that texture directly, so this TX version, you can see it's been color corrected, so it's been gamma corrected, and so therefore it's going to look correct here. So if I just say update, so that's a bit better now, so we get a bit more contrast and it's not washed out, and that's the correct color space. Okay, so we've got our background there, but what we've got here is black, and the reason we've got black around there is because the scene is actually empty apart from the image plane. So if we just go to the perspective, just have a look at this. So as you can see, we've just got our sky dome light. Now you've got to remember that the sky dome light does not appear in reflections in the AI standard shader. So it does appear in specular, but not in reflections. So let me just show you what I mean. I'm just going to push this a little bit back so we don't get any strange things happening. So if I go to the image plane again and just change the depth here to 200, just to push it back a little bit, that's better. Just update this. Okay, it's a little bit blacker now because it's further away as well. And so what we can do, what I was going to show you is the shader. So if I click on this, I can select the glass and then go to the shader. So if you look inside the specular section, not the reflection, let me just turn off reflections here and just change the weight to 0. So now we don't have any reflections. If you turn on specular and just come down and turn on Fresnel, so we have the same sort of effect, you can see that what we get is the reflections appearing in the glass now. and that's from the sky dome light. So the sky dome light. So if you're using specular, if you've got specular on, that does appear in the sky dome light. Also, you'll see your light if it's in the view. Let me just see where it is here. So I'm just going to change my roughness to a sharp reflection so it's not blurred. That's better. So what you can see here is the area light in the reflection. So this is the reason that we're not using specular. Okay, so just to be clear, specular is the same as reflection, except you can control the roughness, so you can control the blurriness of the reflections. And so as part of that, it shows lights in the reflection. So you can see this light is in the reflection, the area light, and that doesn't look very natural. And also the sky dome light is in the reflection, which is what we want, but this area light is showing in the reflection as well, which is not really what we want. So that's the reason that I'm going to use reflection instead, and it will allow me to show you the environment shaders. Okay, so we're going to turn this off, and then what we'll do is go down to reflection and turn that back on. Okay, so now you can see that with reflection, you can't see that sky dome light and you can't see the area light. Okay, so let's go and add some environment shaders. I'm going to just go to the render settings, press this button here. In the Arnold tab, we're going to go down to environment, and in this background section, you can add different shaders. This atmosphere is where you add fog, by the way, so if you click on that, you can add simple fog, which doesn't have shadows, or you can have volumetric scattering, which will allow you to have the dramatic shadows and the fog rays that you get in water, for example. So in this example, we're going to go to background, we're going to click on this. So these are the options that we've got for the background. I'm going to start off with the most complicated one, this ray switch. And so I'm just going to click on that. And what this will allow you to do is choose what type of ray gets what type of shader. So for example, anything that the camera sees, so this what this sees, you can change the color to whatever you want here. Okay, because this hasn't got any diffuse, it's not going to make any difference. But in a reflection, for example, if we wanted that reflection to be red, you can see that we've made our reflection red. Okay, so we've got a different shader for the reflection rays and a different shader for the shadow and refraction and so on. So basically what this allows you to do is put a shader in for refraction and reflection, so you can have a dome in here, a sky dome in these sections for the refraction and reflection, and then the camera you can just use this image plane here, or you can put in a shader. Okay, so this is quite useful for optimizing your scene. So for example, if you've got a complicated shader on a character and you didn't want that shader to calculate with subsurface scattering and things like that, you could put a simple version of that shader into reflection, for example. So when it appears in a reflection, it's going to calculate the simple version, so that can save you a lot of time. So anyway, so we're not going to use this at this time. I just wanted to show you that that's available to you. I'm just going to click on this again and just say delete, and then we'll just grab the sky shader. This physical sky shader, by the way, if I just quickly show you that, if I click on that, you can see it's kind of a sky, and it's basically a procedural sky, so you can choose what type of day it is by choosing the elevation and the azimuth, and you've got different options for intensity and stuff. So it's pretty much the same as most renderers these days. We've got a procedural sky. Obviously it doesn't have any clouds or anything in there, but you can use that as your environment. Okay, so I'm just going to break that connection, delete, and we're going to choose the sky shader. So the sky shader is basically the same as a sky dome light. So you can see it says format, you can pick the format, and then you can map this with a color, except it's not actually a light. It will give off light, so if you watch this, it's actually lighter. It does give off light, but it's not a actual JPEG, so we're going to choose low JPEG. Okay, so now we should have that in the reflections and refractions. So this is the dome here, and you can see it if you isolate the display here. If I click on this isolate button, this is the sky shader, and you can see it just looks like a big dome, just the same as the other one, except basically it's got slightly different parameters. So you do actually see this in the render. If I were to turn off the image plane, then you can see this a bit better. So if I press this button to turn it off and refresh, so now I've turned off my image plane, you can see that in the background there's actually an image there. So that's the difference between the sky dome light and this shader, is that you can actually see in the render your shader. So this is to basically render the environment and put an image like a HDR image that you might have, or some sort of texture that you might have. So I'm just going to select this and I'll just show you some of the parameters in here. So you've got intensity and you've got render stats. So I wouldn't use this as a light because it's not optimized. It doesn't use importance sampling, so it hasn't got those special parameters that we looked at in the Sky Dome in terms of resolution and samples. So you can't actually adjust the sort of quality of this, even though it's giving off light. So what we want to do is actually, we don't want to show this in the render in this case, because we're not using it as an environment. So we're just going to turn off primary visibility, so we can't actually see it. We don't want it to cast shadows, and we don't want it to be visible in diffuse. So watch the lighting here. We don't actually want it to give off light because that's basically making it a lot brighter. Okay, if you actually liked the result, you can keep it. It's got a bit more green, so I might just keep it on actually, but if you wanted to turn that off, you can do. Glossy, this is for glossy reflections, and we want it to be visible in reflections, so watch this. So now we can have reflections and refractions. We don't want really refractions because what we're going to do is just use our image plane anyway, so that doesn't matter. So I'm just going to turn on our image plane again, press this button, and just refresh the scene. There we go. So now our glass should look a lot better now. We've got some reflections all the way around. We've got some refractions, so we can see the background through there, and it looks a lot better. This may be a little bit too high, so I might just adjust that down a bit. Just unisolate that, and let's grab this guy, just move him down a bit. Let's just do a region here. Okay, so in this lesson we adjusted our glass shader so that we've got reflections and refractions in our glass. I'm going to save my scene there.